Magic Tree House. Fact Checker. Knights and Castles by Will Osborne and Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 9. Battles and Sieges. At tournaments, knights fought for glory and prizes. When they went to war, they fought for their lives. Knights went to war for many reasons. Sometimes they fought to help their king get more land for his kingdom. Sometimes they fought to win back land that had been taken from their lord. Sometimes they traveled thousands of miles to fight wars for their church. For nearly 200 years, Christian knights called Crusaders fought to claim land in the Middle East. Many knights fought their hardest battles close to home. They had to defend their lord's castle against enemy attack. Sieges. Sometimes an enemy would try to take over a castle by surprise. A castle in England was once invaded by soldiers hiding in a wagon full of hay. A more common way to try to take over a castle was by siege. During a siege, the enemy army surrounded the castle. They kept people in the castle from coming out. They kept food and supplies from going in. The attacking army tried very hard to get inside the castle. They often built special weapons to help them. These weapons were called siege engines. Some siege engines were huge. The biggest was called a belfry. A belfry was a rolling tower. It was as tall as the castle walls. It could hold hundreds of soldiers. During a siege, the enemy army would roll the belfry up to the castle walls. Then they would open the top. The soldiers inside would climb out and try to go over the battlements. Another siege engine was the battering ram. The battering ram was a big, heavy log. The enemy pounded the log against the castle gates or walls, trying to smash them down. Catapults were like giant slingshots. They could throw big boulders at the castle walls. They could also throw boulders over the walls at the people inside. Boulders weren't the only thing catapults tossed over the castle walls. Sometimes an attacking army threw dead animals inside the castle. They hoped the animals would spread disease. Sometimes they even threw dead people. Yuck! Sometimes an enemy army even threw human heads over the walls. Defending the castle. Of course, the people inside the castle didn't just sit there while the siege was going on. They worked very hard attacking the attackers. Guards shot arrows from the battlements and towers. If the attackers got close enough, the guards dropped rocks and logs down on their heads. Sometimes they poured boiling water or hot oil down on them. There were often secret passages inside the castle. Some of the passage floors had holes in them. The holes were called murder holes. During an attack, guards hid in the passages. They shot arrows or dropped rocks down through the murder holes if an enemy walked below. The end of a siege. Sieges often went on for many months. Even if the enemy armor never got inside the castle, they could still win the siege. If a siege went on long enough, the people inside the castle would starve to death. Most sieges ended before that happened. Sometimes the people inside the castle surrendered. The attacking army then took over the castle and all the land around it. To surrender means to admit defeat and give up to an enemy. When an enemy took over a castle, they usually held the lord's family and any other nobles inside for ransom. That means they would keep them prisoner until someone paid for their release. Sometimes, of course, the people in the castle defeated the enemy. Most castles had secret doors that led outside. Soldiers could sneak out the secret doors and take the enemy by surprise. The secret doors were called sally ports. Sometimes the king or another lord sent help. His army of knights might rescue the people inside the castle. If the enemy was defeated, they could be killed, held for ransom, or thrown in the dungeon. The dungeon. The dungeon was a prison in the dark, damp basement of the castle. Prisoners in the dungeon might be chained to the walls all day and all night. Sometimes they were left to starve to death in their chains. Chapter 10. The End of the Age of Castles. The Age of Castles lasted nearly 500 years. Eventually, though, people stopped wanting to live in castles. Castles were dark. They were drafty. They were dirty. They were not built for comfort. They were built for defense against the weapons of a lord's enemies. As time went by, new weapons were invented. The most powerful of these weapons was the cannon. Cannons were first used in Europe in the 1300s. By the 1400s, most armies used cannons when they attacked a castle. Cannons could fire heavy stone or iron balls against castle walls with great force. Even the strongest castles could not stand up against cannon fire for long. In the late Middle Ages, armies started using cannons on the battlefield too. At the same time, soldiers started carrying guns. A knight's armor and his sword were no match for cannonballs and bullets. The feudal system began to break down. Kings began training full-time armies to defend their kingdoms. By the end of the Middle Ages, hardly any new castles were being built. And the knight battling in shining armor eventually became a thing of the past. Knights and castles today. Knights and castles live on, though, in stories and legends, and in traditions that are still alive today. People still become knights, but the people who become knights today don't have to be good fighters. They don't even have to know how to ride a horse. Knight is now a title a king or queen can give to anyone who has done a great service for his or her country. A woman who is given this honor is called a dame. Many castles built centuries ago are still standing. People from all over the world visit these castles every year. The castles often have displays of armor, weapons, clothes, and other things from the Middle Ages. When you visit one of these castles, you cross a drawbridge into another time. You can touch the stones carved by masons hundreds of years ago. You can walk the battlements where castle guards kept watch for enemy armies. You can sit in the Great Hall, where pages served lords and ladies their meals on silver plates. And your imagination can carry you back over 500 years to the time of knights and castles. Doing more research. There's a lot more you can learn about knights and castles. The fun of research is seeing how many different sources you can explore. Books. Most libraries and bookstores have lots of books about knights, castles, and life in the Middle Ages. Here are some things to remember when you're using books for research. 1. You don't have to read the whole book. Check the table of contents in the index to find the topics you're interested in. 2. Write down the name of the book. When you take notes, make sure you write down the name of the book in your notebook so you can find it again. 3. Never copy exactly from a book. When you learn something new from a book, put it in your own words. 4. Make sure the book is nonfiction. Some books tell make-believe stories about knights and castles. Make-believe stories are called fiction. They're fun to read, but not good for research. Research books have facts and tell true stories. They are called nonfiction. A librarian or teacher can help you make sure the books you use for research are nonfiction. Here are some good nonfiction books about knights and castles. The Best Book of Knights and Castles by Deborah Myrtle. Castle by David Macaulay. Castles by Philip Steele. Knight, a DK Eyewitness book by Christopher Gravitt. Knights and Castles, 50 Hands-On Activities to Experience the Middle Ages by Avery Hart and Paul Mantle. Stephen Beastie's Cross-Sections, Castle by Richard Platt. Museums. Many museums have collections of armor, weapons, and other items from the Middle Ages. They can help you learn more about knights and castles. When you go to a museum, 1. Be sure to take your notebook. Write down anything that catches your interest. Draw pictures, too. 2. Ask questions. There are almost always people at museums who can help you find what you're looking for. 3. Check the calendar. Many museums have special events and activities just for kids. Here are some museums around the country with good medieval collections. Art Institute of Chicago, Cleveland Museum of Art, Detroit Institute of Arts, D. Young Museum, San Francisco, Higgins Armory Museum, Worcester, Massachusetts, Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, Philadelphia Museum of Art. DVDs. Most movies about knights and castles are fiction, but there are some non-fiction DVDs about knights and castles. As with books, make sure the DVDs you watch for research are non-fiction. Check your library or video store for these and other non-fiction titles about knights and castles. Castle, based on the book by David Macaulay from PBS. Knights and Armor from the History Channel. Modern Marvels. Castles and Dungeons from the History Channel. Secrets of Lost Empires. Medieval Siege from NOVA. The Internet. Many websites have facts about knights and castles. Some also have games and activities that can help make learning about knights and castles even more fun. Ask your teacher or your parents to help you find more websites like these, as well as many more books for kids.